So if you have questions, fill out the index card there. So that's how we're doing it.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you for all you do. It is great to be back at Water Congress. It was so nice to walk into the hotel and see so many people, and some people I haven't said hello to yet, but to see so many familiar faces. As I think you all know, the theme of this year's Colorado Water Congress Summer Conference is perspectives. It's really important for us to know where people's perspectives on water or on anything come from. It's equally important, maybe even more, to recognize, really listen, and try to understand all the stakeholders' perspectives. And that is, as you, especially in this room, know, how we solve problems. The most effective, long-lasting policy solutions come from stakeholders sitting across from each other and with each other at the table, listening and genuinely trying to understand where others are coming from. That's how we will solve our water problems, the problems that face us in the 21st century. And that was, of course, the beauty and the wisdom of Russ George and House Bill 5, 1177. He knew well, as I think all of us know, that in the West, our very best ideas are born from listening to one another and scrutinizing all the available evidence and science. From recognizing that all our basins have really different ecologies, hydrologies, functions, needs, and problems. No one size fits all. In fact, it likely fits none. John Wesley Powell gave us a related perspective that can still guide our work today. Watersheds. Watersheds are the foundational base that we can all use to find solutions. And we also know now that solutions that don't take into account our watersheds may not be solutions at all. Colorado is where the water comes from, not just within our basins for us or even for our state. As I think you all know, much of our country relies on that water that comes from our Colorado headwaters. It serves agriculture, serves environmental needs, energy needs, recreation, tourism, manufacturing, municipal needs, and a whole host of other needs, both here and elsewhere. Just the Colorado River system alone serves water needs for more than 35 million people. And it also, of course, produces clean, renewable hydropower for much of the West. Most of that water originates on our public lands. That's one reason among many why it's critical to protect our public lands and keep them public. Here in Colorado, our whole economy, but especially in our 3rd congressional district that I'm running to represent, depends on healthy, free-flowing rivers, unpolluted lakes and streams, and robust, whole riparian habitats. Our big, beautiful district is really a set of river valleys and watersheds. We often identify ourselves by our river basin. For over 41 years, I've said, I'm from the Yampa Valley. When we think of our rivers flowing south, east, west, and yes, north, we remember that we're all in this together. Each basin is unique and different, but we're all in this together. So as the 1177 roundtables and our Colorado Water Plan all recognize, we are interconnected. So when there's a poor snowfall year, we feel it on both sides of the Continental Divide. When we're in a persistent drought, as we have been since 2000, we are all affected. When that snow doesn't come, the hydrograph changes, sometimes radically and permanently. When the hydrograph changes and runoff comes too soon in the cycle for ag irrigators, or it barely comes at all, the impacts are felt statewide. And they're linked with so many other so-called natural features, from wildfire to temperature to drought. They're all interconnected. You know, what we used to consider a decade ago or so or more as a catastrophic or, excuse me, large fire is now commonplace and frequent. That should give us pause alone. Couple that with record high temperatures, longer fire seasons, and the very interconnectedness that sometimes nourishes us turns around to hurt us. The severity of some of our recent fires in my congressional district and other places have so impacted watersheds, as some of us here have worked really hard on for a long time, with sedimentation, so that the water supplies are damaged and agriculture is hurt. Couple that with wildly fluctuating commodity markets, especially for beef, then add trade policy and tariffs that lead to uncertain global markets, and we get a real recipe for disaster in many of our valleys. Starting with the 1177 roundtables and then Swazi in 2006, many of us participated in a variety of innovative basin implementation plans. These BIPs took hard work, dedication, and stick-to-itness, which is usually what we're all about here in the West. Our Colorado Water Plan, from the idea of it to the development of it to now the implementation phase, took many stakeholders coming together to listen, discuss, disagree, yes. Disagreeing is good. You get it out on the table. And then agreeing, and now to implementation plans. It was really exciting for me and an honor to play a really small part in that process as a member of the Interim Water Committee from 2013 to 2017, and also serving on the House Ag Committee, where in the last session before I left, I was the vice chair, because that committee, of course, is where the water bills go. I think it's really important to note that the header on the website for our Colorado Water Plan is collaborating on Colorado's future. Collaborating. That's what we do, and that's what leads us to real solutions. I discovered when I was in the House that water use in the older, more urbanized, densely populated regions of the U.S. to the east of us is really based on riparian water law. But many who serve in the U.S. Congress and federal agencies simply do not understand Western water law. People are often surprised that prior appropriation is actually in our Constitution. It was included because, of course, we were the wild frontier. We were the arid frontier, where indeed whiskey was for drinking and water was for fighting. But it was also included because of the stark realities encountered by settlers in the territories west of the 100th meridian. Our river compacts, especially the 1922 Colorado Compact, were born out of the fact that the other lower basin states were then growing rapidly, more rapidly than we, and were more economically and politically powerful than we in the upper basin. We need to keep those power differentials in mind between the upper and lower basins while still earnestly engaging in real consensus solutions to shortages. And that's a big problem that we have to deal with. I thought I'd understood this pretty well. I moved to Routt County in 1976. That was a 100-year drought year. And I quickly discovered what that meant for the ski industry. And as I got to know the ranchers in Routt County better, I began to understand what that meant for ranching and for municipal supplies. But it really wasn't until I served on the interim committee, water committee, and carefully listened, that I really saw how this misunderstanding of Western water law from those making federal policies really can lead to a one-size-fits-all that doesn't fit us at all. And sadly, once again, we're seeing a resurgence of this one-size-fits-all mentality and policy at the federal level. Recent policy, for example, from Interior on the sage grouse and on the RACs, the BLM Resource Advisory Councils, are two prime examples. In the 1990s, many stakeholders in my home county, Routt County, were increasingly concerned about greater sage grouse habitat and the possibility of the bird being listed. In both West Routt and in South Routt, stakeholder groups came together. They included ranchers, wildlife biologists, bird specialists, local county government agencies, ag nonprofits, conservation nonprofits, and state agencies such as what was then called the DOW, and of course, interested citizens. I first visited one of those sites in 1996 as a brand new county planning commissioner, and I was amazed at the progress that was being made on the Frentress Ranch right along the Yampa River. Now we even have a shuttle ambassador from Colorado to the feds, who has really, John Swartout, who has really made amazing progress. But this new administration and Interior want to change or even halt these local plans. These are local plans, and they want to put in place a top-down approach, saying that this will give more local control. That makes no sense. In fact, I believe it's ideology masquerading as policy. The RACs, the Resource Advisory Councils with the BLM, are another example of this misdirected approach. These RACs have, again, brought people together, worked across the various divides, and they're a key to some really good partnerships that advise the BLM on land use. Up in my neck of the woods, northwest Colorado, people came from all over, and the membership was really representative of those whose lives depended on BLM lands. Again, it was bringing people together, whether it's the roundtables, whether it's the water plan, whether it's the RAC, bringing people together to really discuss these issues and come up with local solutions. Solutions to some of our water issues are now even further complicated in Colorado by federal agencies not being in sync with each other and not understanding our laws and our practices. Hemp cultivation and irrigation is a good example. Hemp was defined in the 2014 federal farm bill as an ag crop. But the Bureau of Rec continued and persists in defining it as cannabis, a level 1 controlled substance. That's why Senator Baumgardner and I passed a bill in the 2017 session that really clarified the protocols for testing hemp so that we knew that it was below that level where it would in fact be defined scientifically as cannabis. In Colorado, the Department of Ag and our statutes had defined hemp as a legitimate crop. When a hemp farmer from Pueblo County came to our committee, that is the Ag Committee and the Interim Committee, after the Bureau of Rec had closed his head gate, we tried to solve the problem, and we ran a bill that tried to clarify that hemp is in fact a legal crop in Colorado. Similarly for cannabis, which is of course a legal crop in Colorado, we see an Attorney General, a U.S. Attorney General, who persists in talking about prosecution in states like ours that have legalized. These federal policies are prohibiting people from using their water rights. They're also preventing economic vitality and real economic growth, and those are just a couple of examples. Another one that some of you may remember, when I was a freshman in 2013, it was just after the U.S. Forest Service had brought up their then new policy and changed the permits for permittees on federal lands. And of course that had a negative impact on ski areas, and it would also have had a negative impact on grazing. So we worked across the aisle, Republicans and Democrats, to try to resolve that situation with a modified rule for permitting. At first that bill didn't pass in 2013, so we worked for 3 more years, and then the bill passed. I bring to you these seemingly disparate cases because they all show both the power of partnership and how lack of partnership between our state and the federal government prevents progress in really bringing people together and doing the things that we in the water community have done for many years. Our Colorado Water Plan is probably the best example, but certainly the roundtables are as well. The notion that we can come together across that table with our diverse interests, our diverse needs, and hammer out plans and policies, evidence-based policies that work for everyone is one of my firmest beliefs. And I do believe that that is the only way we come up with successful policies. So now we've moved from the development stage, the study stage with the water plan into implementation. And seeing those implementation plans coming to fruition in stream management plans and watershed plans, I think is really, really important for us. It's a success, and we should revel in that. For us to reach many of the goals set forth in the water plan and that each of our basins has talked about, we have to invest in infrastructure. That's one of the reasons I'm running for Congress. We used to invest in our people and in our infrastructure, and it made us strong. It made us prosperous. It made us globally competitive. Not just in, of course, developments in our water infrastructure, but transportation, our electric grid. We need to invest in infrastructure. And as you know, as many of you know only too well, most of our infrastructure, whether water infrastructure, transportation infrastructure, or electric grid infrastructure, was built in the 1950s, 60s, and early 70s. Even if we'd had no population growth, zero, we'd still need to upgrade. But factoring in the significant population growth in our state and climate change, it is imperative that we invest in infrastructure, from water infrastructure to transportation infrastructure to our grid. We need efficiency technologies that can be more fully developed. We need data monitoring and measurement for our streams, for other water bodies, and strategically located off-channel, small, efficient storage. We need major investments, and as Doug was mentioning earlier, between Gallagher and Tabor, we're not going to be doing that just with Colorado money. So we need federal investment. Federal investment in infrastructure not only creates living wage skilled jobs immediately, but it also has major multiplier effects and connects people. It connects communities, communities that need water treatment, wastewater, transportation from road and bridge to airports to multimodal and especially to public transit, and the electric grid. Building these projects will create jobs for skilled workers in industries that the international market is starting to leave behind. And they'll create significant return on investment, especially in our smaller rural areas. You know, we often hear how Colorado's economy has been booming. That is not the case in most of the counties that I seek to represent. Some of them, yes, but many of them are still struggling mightily to get by. And so infrastructure investment not only helps us in terms of our water issues, but it helps us create an economy that actually works for everyone, not just the well-connected. But speaking of connections, in the West, water connects us. It connects us all. And we've learned that only by building real, lasting partnerships that include all voices can we meet the challenges of the 21st century, especially climate change. And you're some of the key people who do this work. So thank you very much, and I'd love to take questions.
Representative Mitsch, thank you very much. Back here in the back at the tech table, we've got couple questions, several questions for you. I know you can't see me, so
Right.
just
Disembodied voice, where are you?
It's right up there, isn't it? Okay, what are your thoughts on water sharing, and how could this be done, or should it be done? So again, what are your thoughts on water sharing, and how could this be done, or even should it be done?
Let me be entirely frank with you. I've seen different perspectives and different work on water sharing, and I don't know enough. That's really my answer, and I'm sorry that seems like I'm brushing it aside, but I never like to talk about policy until I know it inside and out. So I would love to learn more, and I would like to especially know what specific policies people are proposing and hear where those are coming from.
Okay, next question. You emphasized the ingenuity of Russ George's basin watershed approach to water in Colorado. How do you think we should best integrate the prior appropriation doctrine fundamental of taking water from where it was to where it was needed, often over small or great divide. So, you want me to read that again? That was a
No,
long
I think
question.
I've got the gist. One of the things in the water plan is an emphasis on keeping water in the basin of origin. And of course, our trans-mountain diversions have been and continue to be critical for our economy. But we really need to think of ways to not have new trans-mountain diversions for many reasons. The key one being that when, not if, when there's a compact call in the Colorado, some of those diversions, trans-mountain diversions, will be the first called, among the first called. So I think it's really, really important for us to think about ways to work together, but at the same time, trans-mountain diversions, I think, are a more 20th century kind of approach, and we need to think about 21st century approaches. We also need to remember, as I said earlier in my talk, that the vast majority of our headwaters, certainly in my district, in CD3, Congressional District 3, originate on public lands. So we need to protect those public lands. The schemes put forth last session, well, actually it was in the 115th Congress, by Nathan Chaffetz from Utah, which would have sold 93,000 acres of Colorado's public lands, don't make sense for any of us. And I'm not sure if I totally answered your question.
Okay, let's continue to move on. Will you be an advocate for new? New was underlined. Will you be an advocate for new storage projects? And please elaborate on that.
As I said in my remarks, small, efficient storage projects are certainly something that we will most likely need. Not on the kind of scale that we've seen in the 20th century. So again, I think small and efficient off-channel projects may be very helpful in storing and in delivering.
Okay, last question that I've got right now, unless we have some others. Could you tell us a little bit about your perspective, the kind of the roots of your perspective on prior appropriation, and are you willing to fight to keep it?
The short answer to that is yes. As I said in my remarks, prior appropriation is in our Constitution, and it is proved since 1876 to be a remarkably flexible regime. We've had new kinds of water rights about almost 40 years ago. But just before I moved to Colorado, we had in-stream flow rights. Much more recently, we've had RISDs, recreational in-channel diversions, which have been absolutely critical for the economies of some of our western slope communities. Communities like my hometown, but also Salida, Durango. Really, that has been a very important kind of development, but it has stayed within the general regime of prior appropriation. And I think that kind of flexibility speaks to the wisdom of those who settled our state, and I think we can keep working with that.
I said that was the last one. I've got actually a couple more. We may have heard me talk a little bit about forest health and as well as NEPA. And could you maybe elaborate a little bit on either one of those in terms of where you elected, those things would fit into your priorities?
Thanks. Forest health, water, agriculture, municipal supplies, recreational supplies, if you will, they're all interconnected. As I said in my talk, when we have a bad snow year, and we've had a lot of them since 2000, the snowpack is low. And that sets off a whole set of chain reactions. One of the things it does is changes the hydrograph so that runoff comes much sooner and much more quickly. Couple that with high temperatures, persistent drought, heavy winds, and WUI, the wildlife-urban interface, lots more people settling right at the edge of public lands, you have a recipe for disaster, and we've seen it. As I said, we used to, a decade ago, talk about catastrophic fires as being 5,000 acres. Well, guess what? This year, the Gardner Fire, the Levita Pass Fire, Spring Fire, was over 105,000 acres. And that seems to be a new normal. So we have to think about the interconnectedness between fire, between drought, between high temperatures, and between our patterns of runoff. And once you get these kinds of extreme fires, which really bring with them the ability to literally scorch the earth and to really almost sterilize the ground, what you have, of course, then is sedimentation and runoff. Once the rain does come, you start to get your watersheds and whatever river, whether it's the Rio Grande, which is one in particular, or a number of others that get sedimentation buildup. And so it's a cycle that keeps repeating itself. One of the things I saw this year traveling around, I was on my way to Durango, and of course they had really bad fires this summer. They also had really bad mudslides. And we actually got caught in one, and it sounds dramatic, but it wasn't. I mean, it was just, the mudslide was there, the car didn't want to move very well. But this really affects people. So my basic scientific understanding is that these are interconnected. And if you try to solve one without looking at the others, you're not going to solve the problem. And I think people are often afraid to talk about climate and climate change. We have to tackle climate change. The evidence is there, and we have to do that at the federal level. A colleague said to me, a colleague that I work with a lot across the aisle when I was in the House, Colorado House, said to me, Diane, do you believe in climate change? And I said, it's not a religion. And it's not. I mean, we have to use science as a basis and evidence. Now, having been a social scientist most of my career, I know that two scientists can look at the same piece of data and sometimes come up with very different conclusions. But that's part of the discussion process, and that's what makes for good policy, is sitting down at the table, armed with evidence, and listening to people from local areas. And I really fear that listening to people from local areas is going astray at the federal level. Other questions? Well, thank you. Thank you all for everything you do. Thank you.